Wait, am I live now? Huh. Let me just double check because I don't know whether I'm live. I'm live. Okay. Awesome. So thank you, David. I appreciate your patience in waiting for me. I didn't know I had to install software, and then I had to input a key, and it was super complicated, but I've got it resolved. So thank you very much for coming to this discussion. I'm just going to read an initial part from the essay, and then we can decide whether to read the entire essay, which would take quite a while, or we can stop there for commentary and Q&A. So yeah, I can just say a little bit too about why wait, am I still live? I hope I'm still live. Oh my gosh. I can just say a little bit about why this is important to me. Basically, let me pull up my notes. The text was something that we read in a seminar on aesthetic theory with Dr. April Flakne at New College of Florida. I wrote my final project on Heidegger and Nietzsche and physiological aesthetics. That's not super important here, but my favorite moment in the seminar was reading this essay on truth and lies in an extramoral sense. In this essay, he argues that we overestimate the importance of the human intellect in proportion to the vastness of the universe and eternity. He argues that the concept of truth first arose when we fixed some linguistic designations in place for the sake of the human being's ability to live in cooperation with other people in society. Nietzsche argues that we abstract experience into general categories when we use language, but that this abstraction is a form of deception or simulation, and that human beings will actually even shrink back from the truth if it does not serve their lives. The liar is excluded from society, not due to the sheer fact of being a deceiver, if all language is a form of deception, but rather due to the damaging effects their misuse of conventional language designations has on the order of society. A word is a metaphor. Etymologically, it means to carry over from the ancient Latin and Greek. It's an attempt to illustrate the reality of the world using sounds. Over time, these metaphors that we call words calcify into concepts, into truths. To me, this serves as a humbling reminder both of the insignificance of the human intellect, which is a form of hubris and simulation used in place of fangs or claws by human beings as a means to survive, but also its specialness because of the rarity and unlikeliness of a concept such as pure or objective truth ever arising from an intellect that itself derives its power from a simulation and from an overestimation of its own value. I think that this should remind us of the importance of truth, but also teach us that there are valid reasons to be skeptical about whether perfect objective truth is always the goal, whether it is in fact good for life to seek truth at any price, given that certain truths or an excess of truth can have effects that are harmful to life, and that a mechanical explanation of the universe, a purely scientific explanation of the universe, cannot always provide existential meaning to our lives. So with that, I'll just go ahead and start reading. Yeah, let's go. On Truth and Lies in an Extramoral Sense by Friedrich Nietzsche. In some remote corner of the universe, poured out and glittering in innumerable solar systems, there once was a star on which clever animals invented knowledge. That was the highest and most mendacious minute of world history, yet only a minute. After nature had drawn a few breaths, the star grew cold, and the clever animals had to die. One might invent such a fable and still not have illustrated sufficiently how wretched, how shadowy and flighty, how aimless and arbitrary the human intellect appears in nature. There have been eternities when it did not exist, and when it is done for again, nothing will have happened. For this intellect has no further mission that would lead beyond human life. It is human, rather, and only its owner and producer gives it such importance, as if the world pivoted around it. But if we could communicate with the mosquito, then we would learn that he floats through the air with the same self-importance, feeling within itself the flying center of the world. There is nothing in nature so despicable or insignificant that it cannot immediately be blown up like a bag by a slight breath of this power of knowledge. And just as every porter wants an admirer, the proudest human being, the philosopher, thinks that he sees on the eyes of the universe telescopically focused from all sides on his actions and thoughts. It is strange that this should be the effect of the intellect, for after all, it was given only as an aid to the most unfortunate, most delicate, most evanescent beings, in order to hold them for a minute in existence, from which otherwise, without this gift, they would have every reason to flee as quickly as Lessing's son. In a famous letter to Johann Joachim Eschenberg, December 31st, 1778, Lessing relates the death of his infant son who, quote, understood the world so well that he left it at the first opportunity. That haughtiness which goes with knowledge and feeling, which shrouds the eyes and senses of man in a blinding fog, therefore deceives him about the value of existence by carrying in itself the most flattering evaluation of knowledge itself. Its most universal effect is deception, but even its most particular effects have something of the same character. The intellect, as a means for the preservation of the individual, unfolds its chief powers in simulation, for this is the means by which the weaker, less robust individuals preserve themselves, since they are denied the chance of waging the struggle for existence with horns or fangs of beasts of prey. In man, this art of simulation reaches its peak. Here, deception, flattering, lying and cheating, talking behind the back, posing, living in borrowed splendor, being masked, the disguise of convention, acting a role before others and before oneself. In short, the constant fluttering around the single flame of vanity is so much the rule and the law that nothing, almost nothing, is more incomprehensible than how an honest and pure urge for truth could make its appearance among men. They are deeply immersed in illusions and dream images, and this almost evokes Plato's cave. Their eye glides only over the surface of things and sees forms. Their feeling nowhere leads into truth, but contents itself with the reception of stimuli, playing, as it were, a game of blindman's bluff on the backs of things. Moreover, man permits himself to be lied to at night his life long when he dreams, and his moral sense never even tries to prevent this, although men have been said to overcome snoring by sheer willpower. What indeed does man know of himself? Can he even once perceive himself completely, laid out as if in an illuminated glass case? Does not nature keep much the most from him, even about his body, to spellbind and confine him in a proud, deceptive consciousness, far from the coils of the intestines, the quick current of the bloodstream, and the involved tremors of the fibers? She threw away the key, and woe to the calamitous curiosity which might peer just once through a crack in the chamber of consciousness and look down, and sense that man rests upon the merciless, the greedy, the insatiable, the murderous, in the indifference of his ignorance, hanging in dreams, as it were, upon the back of a tiger. In view of this, whence in all the world comes the urge for truth? Insofar as the individual wants to preserve himself against other individuals, in a natural state of affairs, he employs the intellect mostly for simulation alone. But because man, out of need and boredom, wants to exist socially, herd fashion, he requires a peace pact, and he endeavors to banish at least the very crudest bellum omni contra omnes, war of all against all, from his world. This peace pact brings with it something that looks like the first step toward the attainment of this enigmatic urge for truth. For now that Now that is fixed which henceforth shall be truth. That is, a regularly valid and obligatory designation of things is invented. And this linguistic legislation also furnishes the first laws of truth. For it is here that the contrast between truth and lie first originates. The liar uses the valid designations, the words, to make the unreal appear as real. He says, for example, I am rich, when the word poor would be the correct designation of his situation. He abuses the fixed conventions by arbitrary changes or even by reversals of the names. When he does this in a self-serving way damaging to others, then society will no longer trust him but exclude him. Thereby men do not flee from being deceived as much as from being damaged by deception. What they hate at this stage is basically not the deception, but the bad hostile consequences of certain kinds of deceptions. In a similarly limited way, man wants the truth. He desires the agreeable, life-preserving consequences of truth, but he is indifferent to pure knowledge, which has no consequences. He is even hostile to possibly damaging and destructive truths. And moreover, what about these conventions of language? Are they really the products of knowledge, of the sense of truth? Do the designations and the things coincide? Is language the adequate expression of all realities? Only through forgetfulness can man ever achieve the illusion of possessing a truth in the sense just designated. If he does not wish to be satisfied with truth in the form of a tautology, that is, with empty shells, then he will forever buy illusions for truths. What is a word? The image of a nerve stimulus in sounds. But to infer from the nerve stimulus a cause outside us, that is already the result of a false and unjustified application of the principle of reason. And this almost sounds Kantian to me. The different languages set side by side show that what matters with words is never the truth, never an adequate expression, else there would not be so many languages. The thing in itself, for that is what pure truth without consequences would be, is quite incomprehensible to the creators of language and not at all worth aiming for. I find this very interesting because he detests Kant, but he's absolutely making an argument that the thing in itself is inaccessible, which is what Kant is arguing in the Critique of Pure Reason. But anyway, let's continue. One designates only the relations of things to man, and to express them one calls on the boldest metaphors. A nerve stimulus first transposed into an image, first metaphor. The image, in turn, imitated by a sound, second metaphor. Let us still give special consideration to the formation of concepts. Every word immediately becomes a concept, inasmuch as it is not intended to serve as a reminder of the unique and wholly individualized original experience to which it owes its birth, but must at the same time fit innumerable more or less similar cases, which means, strictly speaking, never equal. In other words, a lot of unequal cases. Every concept originates through our equating what is unequal. No leaf ever wholly equals another, and the concept leaf is formed through an arbitrary abstraction from these individual differences, through forgetting the distinctions. And now it gives rise to the idea that in nature there might be something besides the leaves, which would be leaf, some kind of original form, after which all leaves have been woven, marked, copied, colored, curled, and painted, but by unskilled hands, so that no copy turned out to be a correct, reliable, and faithful image of the original form. We call a person honest. Why did he act so honestly today, we ask? Our answer usually sounds like this: because of his honesty. Honesty, that is to say, again, the leaf is the cause of the leaves. After all, we know nothing of an essence-like quality named honesty. We know only numerous, individualized, and thus unequal actions, which we equate by omitting the unequal, and by then calling them honest actions. In the end, we distill from them a qualitas occulta, a hidden quality, with the name of honesty. What then is truth? A mobile army of metaphors, metonyms, and anthropomorphisms. In short, a sum of human relations which have been enhanced, transposed, and embellished poetically and rhetorically, and which after long use seem firm, canonical, and obligatory to a people. Truths are illusions about which one has forgotten that this is what they are. Metaphors which are worn out and without sensuous power. coins which have lost their pictures and now matter only as metal, no longer as coins. We still do not know where the urge for truth comes from, for as yet we have heard only of the obligation imposed by society that it should exist. To be truthful means using the customary metaphors. In moral terms, the obligation to lie according to a fixed convention, to lie heard like in a style obligatory for all. Integrity. Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of wondering if there is really no way to define honesty that doesn't reduce to a tautology. That was something I was kind of questioning as I was reading that. I guess the two things that I am wondering about as I read this excerpt, firstly, is when he says that the concept of truth arises when man ends the war of all against all and creates a peace pact. That's sort of, I mean, it's evoking Hobbes, right, in the state of nature. And do you think of this as a historical event, like there was, you know, a specific period of history where people started to, I mean, I guess this is a question for anthropologists and archaeologists or something like that, but, you know, when did humans begin to develop language? Because it's like he's saying something about the structure of our everyday lives. Like every day we get up and we say, I'm going to have a basic integrity to a concept of truth in my use of language and do this for the sake of cooperative social events. But it's also something that we evolved. And I think that's kind of interesting to think about. And the other thing that I'm thinking about a lot when I read this is the interplay with Platonic ideas. Because at first he says something that sounds very much in the spirit of Plato when he's describing how the intellect is a form of simulation. He's saying, you know, that we overestimate the value of the effects of the intellect, and we're basically immersed in an illusion the way that in Plato's allegory of the cave, the people in the cave only see the shadows on the wall and they don't see the forms. But Nietzsche doesn't believe in forms, and he makes that very clear later in the essay excerpt that we just read, where he's talking about leaves and how every leaf is absolutely unique, and basically we're using, you know, sound to create a metaphor about a reality that we can never really encompass, and there is no such thing as the leaf as such. So is evoking a Platonic allegory at first, but conceptually I think you can see his break with Plato. And I don't know when this was written. I guess it was in relation to his other works, if it was an early essay, but that would be interesting to know, because I know he develops his critique of Plato in a lot of different works. He detests Socrates very clearly in The Birth of Tragedy. So, yeah, I'm trying to decide, we can keep reading, or I don't know how many people are viewing, if it's just you, David. If you want to say anything else, you're welcome to. If you have any questions or commentary that you want to share. I'll just pause for a moment. Let me pull up the PDF of the full text. It's a different translation, so I'd have to actually find the different point. Where it starts. Oh, that's flattering, David. You don't have to flatter me. This translation that I've just pulled up is a different translation. I was reading something from John Paul Catholic University that was excerpted from the Nietzsche channel on GeoCities, but this translation, which is by AKM Adam, it's quite different. Like here, he's saying, okay, I'll reread part of what I've already read. The thing in itself, exactly that which would be a pure inconsequential truth, is in fact entirely incomprehensible to the shapers of language, and is not in the least worth the effort. They designate only the relations of things to humans, and appropriate the most audacious metaphors to help express them. A nerve stimulus in the beginning figured into an image, first metaphor. The image then imitated in a sound, second metaphor. And every time, a leap beyond one sphere. This is actually more accurate because he's evoking the etymology of metaphor here, a leap beyond, to carry over, or to the beyond, one sphere into the midst of which is an entirely another, other and new. So there's a complete disconnect between the world of reality and the ultimately arbitrary designations of sounds or written forms that we use in language. One can imagine a person who is entirely deaf and had never had a perception of tone or music, how such a person marvels at, say, Chladni's sound figures in the sand, finds their cause in the vibrations of the string, and then will swear that he must know what people call tone. Is this a dig at Beethoven? I mean, Beethoven had bad hearing. So it is with all of us in language. We believe we know something about the things themselves if we speak about trees, colors, snow, and flowers, and yet we possess nothing but metaphors for things, which by no means correspond to the original essence. As the tone appears as the sand figure, so the enigmatic X of the thing itself appears once as nerve stimulus, then as image, finally as sound. In any case, therefore, the origin of language did not happen logically, and the whole substance in which and with which the person of truth, the researcher, the philosopher, fashion and build comes, if not from Cocoon Bulopolis, okay, then in any case, not from the essence of things. Let us think especially, however, about the formation of concepts. Every word immediately becomes a concept this way. It is supposed to serve not just as a reminder of the primitive experience to which it owes its origin, which is unique and in every way individualized, but has simultaneously to suit countless more or less similar, that is, strictly speaking, never alike, therefore absolutely unlike cases. Let me read your comments, David. Oh, that's interesting. I like Jung. I don't know too much about him. Can you elaborate on that? Is that something that you are mentioning in relation to something in the text in specific? I think Nietzsche would definitely agree that we have a shadow side and a positive side. Yeah, that's cool. I also definitely don't know much about Native American spirituality. Okay, I can keep reading and see like how long it takes for me to get sick of it, I guess. Just as surely as no leaf is ever entirely like another, so surely the concept leaf is formed by arbitrarily abandoning these individual differences. Well, let me pause here and mention, he's claiming that there's a complete disconnect between the metaphor that is expressed in the word and the thing in itself that it's referring to. And I guess I wonder how arbitrary that always is in every case. Because with language, there are alphabetical languages and there are ideographic languages. You know, English is an alphabetic language, but in Chinese, there are ideograms, and the characters are absolutely unique and maybe almost visually or on some preconscious level meant to evoke the thing that they're referring to. I don't know whether that literally means that like an ideogram of a tree is a character that resembles a tree, but it seems like possible that it's not that the connections that we make with words to things is completely arbitrary, but just that it's happening on this preconscious level that has something to do with the structure of our perception. Yeah. I mean, and he says that there are all different languages, and that is part of like why we can discern that the concept of truth is founded on illusion. Because I think near the beginning of the text, let me find it. To infer from the nerve stimulus a cause outside us that is already the result of a false and unjustified application of the principle of reason. The different languages set side by side show that what matters with words is never the truth, never an adequate expression, else there would not be so many languages. So the fact that there are many different languages somehow indicates to him that none of them are the ones that are really getting at the truth, I guess. Every concept originates from the making similar of dissimilars. And this is something that's really important too, because it shows up. Nietzsche really doesn't like equality, and he refers to logic as, you know, a homogenizing force that renders things equal that are unequal. He talks about democracy as being detestable because of the effect it can have on great individuals. There's like a whole anti-democratic dimension to what he does with this conceptual flourish of like rejecting the making similar what is not similar. He thinks that, I mean, but it's as he points out, it's not good for life necessarily to fully understand that truth. Because if you go around like recognizing the absolute uniqueness and difference and irreplaceability of every object and person you encounter all the time and never make any equivocations, you ultimately couldn't function. And you know, that's why he says that we're creating a peace pact in order to live socially and in herd fashion. We're reducing things down to like concepts that are ultimately like not encapsulated by them. So I don't know. I mean, what is? I guess I feel like it's true that the truth has like probably also survival benefits too, and he doesn't really talk about that, which seems kind of common sense to me. Like, in some cases, truths are matters of indifference, and they're, you know, truths of quantum physics or something that don't have a direct applicability to our lives. But the truth of like whether there's a tiger chasing me or not is pretty important for me to be correct about. So even though there is this disconnect in the epistemological sense where we can't know like the absolute connection between the word and the thing in itself, it's still like we can sort of act as if we know what the connection is and see how reliably that allows us to order and interpret our experiences in a systematic way. So I think, you know, a lot of people want to characterize Nietzsche as being a complete moral relativist who doesn't believe in absolute truth. And it's because of the latter part, at least, is because of essays like this, where he's critiquing the value of truth. He also discusses this in, all of his works, in the Untimely Meditations on the Uses and Disadvantages of History for Life. He talks about the power of forgetting and how the historical sense can become excessive and paralyzing if you, kind of like the painting that by Klee that Walter Benjamin evokes when he talks about the angel of history, when you're constantly looking backwards. And I think of it in terms as a painter, like if I knew about art history, I think I would have a harder time creating paintings because I would be like so aware of the truths of the achievements of the past that I would feel intimidated and have difficulty beginning. So there's like a limit to the value of truth too. He talks about this in The Birth of Tragedy, how art is a sort of salve for difficult truths. The illusions of art allow us to bear the pain and suffering that, like, the truth of our mortality causes us, for example. And in The Gay Science, he goes so far as to say that he's experimentally suspending the value of truth, which is itself a truth claim. Is truth really true, or is truth really good? And he takes it, pretty far. I don't know how I can summarize The Gay Science in just one sentence, because it's really a collection of aphorisms that are about all sorts of different things. But this is a theme that shows up throughout, I think, all of Nietzsche's works, I would say. I'm going to look up when this was written in relation to his other works. Friedrich Nietzsche bibliography. So it was written pretty early on. It was written in 1873. Über Wahrheit und Lüge im außermoralischen Sinn. My German pronunciation is not good, but it was written the year after The Birth of Tragedy. So that was like I think that was his first book. So already in the beginning of his work, you can see something that, this concept unfolding that he stays with for the rest of his career as a philosopher. Even though he wasn't a professional philosopher, he was sort of exiled out of the academy after he published The Birth of Tragedy, in part because, in The Birth of Tragedy, he didn't cite any sources. He just kind of ranted about ancient Greek culture and made connections in Greek mythology that a lot of classics people said were not really historically accurate. But it's like he's not claiming to be historically accurate when he's talking about the ancient Greek mythology stuff in The Birth of Tragedy. He's repurposing Apollo, Dionysus, and all these Greek gods for the purpose of making his own argument about the relationship between art and truth. Do you remember what works of his that you read, David? It was many moons ago, but... Okay. Well, I'll keep reading this as long as you want. It's like halfway through the full essay, so we've been talking since I don't know how long, I don't know when exactly I went live, but I can keep reading if you'd like, if you're up for it. Oh, cool. Yeah, my grasp on Greek history could be better, definitely, but, I'm very interested in learning more. I have like a rudimentary grasp of ancient Greek as a language, but that's from like elementary school. Okay, I might just keep reading anyway, just in case anyone else shows up. Oh, hi, Nathaniel. Hi, we're like about halfway through the essay. So I can go ahead and keep reading. We've basically talked about why I think this is important, because it shows both the way that we overestimate the value of the intellect and human reason in the scale of the universe and eternity. So it kind of wants us to humble ourselves, like we can't really access the truth of things with language necessarily in the way that we might think. But it also shows us what the social value of truth is, even if it's not as absolute as we think it is. Thank you, David. I really appreciate you showing up for this. Have a good night. So it also shows the social value of truth, and it shows us that it's actually kind of special and unique that the urge for pure and objective truth ever arose from the human intellect, because the human intellect is based in a form of simulation. I think what really like functionally makes this comprehensible to me is when he says that the intellect is a means by which those beings that cannot wage the war for survival with fangs and claws preserve themselves. So it's basically, the function of memory, being able to remember things and use your intellect and cleverness to survive if you don't have brute strength. That's kind of what he uses to argue that, part of what he uses to argue that there's like this disconnect between the way reality appears to the intellect and the function of the intellect in reality, if that makes sense. So right now we're on a passage talking about leaves and how the concept of leaf is completely unique. Or the concept of the leaf is not unique. It makes all the individual leaves that exist in the world seem to be the same, as if there's a Platonic form of leaf somewhere that they're all derived from, but they're not. And he's kind of critiquing Plato by saying this, because Plato argues that there are Platonic forms, like the form of the good, from which all incidents of worldly goodness arise. So I'll just keep reading. I'll back up a little bit since you just got here, but yeah. Let us think especially, however, about the formation of concepts. Every word immediately becomes a concept this way. It is supposed to serve not just as a reminder of the primitive experience to which it owes its origin, which is unique and in every way individualized, but has simultaneously to suit countless more or less similar, that is, strictly speaking, never alike, therefore absolutely unlike cases. Every concept originates from the making similar of dissimilars. So this is really important for Nietzsche. He doesn't want you to equate things that are actually different. And he applies this both in the realm of logic and truth, but also in the political realm. He doesn't want people to make claims of equality between types of people who he argues are not actually equal to each other, or at least different, if not ranked hierarchically. Every concept originates from the making similar of dissimilars. Just as surely as no leaf is ever entirely like another, so surely the concept leaf is formed by arbitrarily abandoning these individual differences, by forgetting the distinctions, and now the representation arises as if there were in nature a leaf apart from leaves, something like a primitive form after which all leaves were woven, designed, calibrated, colored, crimped, and decorated, but by maladroit hands, so that no correct and reliable example might result as a faithful replica of the primitive form. We call someone honest. Why has he acted so honestly today, we ask. Our answer usually runs because of his honesty. Honesty, one more version of the leaf, is the cause of the leaves. We know absolutely nothing about an essential quality called honesty, but rather just numerous individualized, thus different actions, which we make similar by overlooking their dissimilarities, and then that designate as honest actions. In the end, we formulate from them a qualitas occulta, or a hidden quality, with the name honesty. Overlooking individuals and reality gives us the concept. It also gives us the form, whereas nature knows no concepts or forms, thus also no categories, but rather only an X, like a variable, inaccessible to us and undefinable. Then also our contrast between individuals and categories is anthropomorphic and comes not from the essence of things, though we do not also venture to say that it does not correspond to them. That would be a dogmatic claim and just as undemonstrable as its contrary. Yeah, it does sound paradoxical. It's definitely, there's a lot of contradiction in Nietzsche, but the essay is called On Truth and Lies in an Extramoral Sense, and it was written in 1873. So it was written the year after Nietzsche had just published his first book when he was 23. And he had been kind of exiled from the academy because in his first book, he wasn't citing sources to in a way that made the classics people happy. So this is a really important passage, if I can just keep reading. What then is truth? A mobile army of metaphors, metonyms, anthropomorphisms, in short, a totality of human relations which have been poetically and rhetorically intensified, transferred, and decorated, and which after long use people think are fixed, canonical, and binding. Truths are illusions, which people have forgotten are illusions, metaphors which have become worn out and impossible to perceive, coins whose imprints have worn off and which are now useful only as metal, no longer as coins. But we still don't know from where the urge to truth comes. Up to now, we have only heard about the commitment which a community imposes in order to exist. To be truthful, that is, to use the usual metaphors, therefore expressed in moral terms, to lie according to the fixed conventions, to lie herd-like in a style which is binding for everyone. So he's basically saying that truth arises when we agree we don't want a war of everybody against everyone. We want civilization and we want cooperation. And so we're going to mutually agree that, when we're referring to leaves, we use the word leaf. So it's a kind of peace pact, he says. Now, people freely forget that's the way things are. Therefore, one lies in the designated way unconsciously after centuries of habituation, and precisely from this unconsciousness, precisely from this forgetting, comes the sentiment for truth. From this feeling of obligation to designate one thing red, another cold, a third mute, arises a moral urge relating to the truth. From the contrast of liar, whom no one trusts, whom all ostracize, people demonstrate to themselves the honorableness, the trustworthiness, and usefulness of the truth. Now they put forth their actions as rational beings under the domination of abstractions. They no longer permit themselves to be carried away by sudden impressions, by intuitions. They generalize all these impressions first by way of more faded, cooler concepts in order to tie them to the engine of their lives and actions. Everything that distinguishes people from animals depends on this capacity to evaporate vivid metaphors into schemas, to dissolve images into concepts. It is precisely in the field of these schemata that something is possible which might never succeed with regard to vivid first impressions, to construct a pyramidal arrangement of castes and levels. Okay, this is interesting. So he says basically hierarchy comes from this capability to dissolve images into concepts and metaphors into schema. to construct a pyramidal arrangement of castes and levels, to create a new world of laws, privileges, subordinations, boundary determinations, which now steps in front of the other vivid world of first impressions, as the more certain, more universal, better known, and more human, and therefore as the regulative and imperative world. While each perception metaphor is individual and without equivalent, thus always knowing how to escape every classification, the great structure of concepts shows the frozen regularity of a Roman columbarium, and logic exhales that rigor and chilliness characteristic of mathematics. Whoever has this chilly temperament will hardly believe that even the concept, bony and cubical as a die and just as variable, still only remains the residuum of a metaphor, and that illusion of the artistic transfiguration of nerve stimuli into images is, if not the mother, then the grandmother of any concept. In this dice game of concepts, what is called truth is using any die as designated, counting its spots exactly, forming the correct categories, and never transgressing against the caste system or the sequence or of the order of precedence. As the Romans and the Etruscans sliced the heavens with rigid mathematical lines and consigned a god to a space thus delimited as to a templum, so every race has such a mathematically divided heaven concept and now uses the demand for truth to mean that each god concept should be sought only in his sphere. Here one may certainly wonder at humanity as at a powerful construction genius who succeeds in piecing together an infinitely complicated conceptual cathedral upon moving foundations and, as it were, on flowing water. Of course, in order to take hold on such a foundation, it must be a construction as of spider silk, delicate enough to be carried along with the wave, secure enough not to be blown apart by every wind. As a construction genius, humans in this way far surpass the bees. The latter build out of wax, which they put together from nature, while the former form the far more delicate stuff of concepts, which they must first fabricate from themselves. Here they are very much to be wondered at, but not on account of their urge for truth, for the pure knowledge of things. If someone hides something behind a bush, and then seeks and finds it just there, then the search and discovery are nothing much to praise. So it is regarding the search for and discovery of truth within the rational region. If I define mammal, and then declare after inspecting a camel, see a mammal, a truth will thereby have been brought to light, but it is of marginal value. I mean, it is anthropomorphic through and contains not a single point which would be true in itself, really and universally valid apart from humanity. The inquirer after such truths basically seeks only the transformation of the world into humanity. One strives for an understanding of the world as a human thing, and at best forces in oneself a feeling of assimilation. Like astrologers, who observe the stars in service of humanity and in connection with its well-being and suffering, so such inquirers observe the whole world as it bears on humanity, as the infinite broken echo of a primal sound, humanity as the reproduced replica of one primal image, humanity. Their policy is to take humanity as the measure of all things. In so doing, they proceed from the error of believing they have the unmediated thing before them as pure object. Thus they forget the metaphoricity of the original perception metaphor and take it as the thing itself. Only by forgetting that primitive metaphor world, only by the hardening and stiffening of an original welter of images gushing forth in molten fluidity out of the primal capacity of human fantasy, only by the unconquerable belief that this sun, this window, this table might be truth in itself, in short, only by humanity's forgetting itself as subjects, and indeed as artistically creating subjects, do they live with some calm, security, and consistency. If they could be outside the prison walls of this belief for only a moment, it would be all over for their self-consciousness. Already this costs them trouble of admitting to themselves that the insect or bird perceives an entirely different world from that of humanity, and the question of which the two perceived worlds is correct is entirely meaningless, since it would have to be measured by the standard of correct perception, that is, with a non-existent standard. Actually, however, it seems to me that the correct perception, which would have to mean the adequate expression of an object in the subject, is a contradictory nothing. Between two absolutely different spheres, as between subject and object, there is no cause in song. The image which occurs to her will disclose still more by this exchange of spheres than the empirical world discloses of the essence of things. Even the relation of the nerve stimulus to the image brought forth is in itself nothing essential. If, however, the selfsame image has been brought forth 1,000,000 times and has been bequeathed through many generations of people, indeed at last appears to the entirety of humanity as the result of the same occasion, then it finally acquires the same meaning for humanity, as if it were the unique necessary image, and as if that relation of the original nerve stimulus to the image brought forth were a strict causal relationship, as a dream, constantly repeated, would be perceived and judged as reality. Through and through. But the hardening and stiffening of a metaphor guarantees nothing as far as the necessity and conclusive justification of this metaphor. It is certain that all people who are accustomed to such observations have felt a deep mistrust for every idealism of this kind, as often as they absolutely satisfied themselves of the eternal consistency, ubiquity, and regularity of the laws of nature. Here everything, as far as we press from the heights of the telescopic world to the depths of the microscopic world, is so secure, perfected, infinite, law-like, without lack. Science will always have to dig these holes with results, and everything that is found will be consistent and will not contradict itself. How little is this like a product of fantasy? For if it were such, it would, after all, have to disclose its simulation and unreality somewhere. Against this, it can be said that were everyone to have a different sense perception for him or herself, could we ourselves perceive sometimes a bird, sometimes as a worm, sometimes as a plant, or were one of us to see the same nerve stimulus as red that another sees as blue, or a third even hear it as a tone, then no one would ever talk about the law-likeness of nature, but rather they would grasp it only as the most highly subjective creation. So then what is a law of nature really for us? It is not known to us in itself, but rather only in its effects, that is, in its relations to other laws of nature, which again are known to us only as a sum of relations. Therefore, all these relations still only further refer to one another, and their essences are to us thoroughly incomprehensible, only that which we import. Time, space, thus the succession of relations and quantity, is really known to us. Everything wonderful, however, which we behold in the law of nature, which demands our explanation, and which could seduce us into the mistrust of idealism, lies precisely and entirely only in the mathematical strictness and inviolability of the notions of time and space. We produce these, however, in ourselves and out of ourselves with the same necessity with which the spider spins. If we are forced to apprehend all things only under these forms, then it is not so surprising that we apprehend only these forms in all things. They all must bear the law of numbers in themselves, and it is precisely number that is most astonishing in things. All the regularity which impresses us so in the stars' courses and in chemical processes fundamentally coincides with those characteristics which we ourselves import into things, so that we thereby impress ourselves. Thus it follows from this, indeed, that the artistic formation of metaphor, with which each of our perceptions begins, already presupposed those forms and therefore is completed with them. Only the firm persistence of these primal forms accounts for the possibility that still further on a building of concepts could be constituted from the metaphors themselves. This is, namely, a counterfeit of time, space, and numerical relations from the ground of metaphors. Oh, thank you for letting me know. Am I still freezing? Okay. Yeah, it's definitely fascinating to think about. And I think there is value to, determining what the laws of something like the laws of nature are. If things are consistent and regular, we can kind of infer certain laws from that. But what that says about the world in itself, I guess, is what he's questioning. Whether we can get outside of language. As we have seen, originally language and in later times science works on the construction of concepts. As the bee builds the cells and at the same time fills the cells with honey, so science works ceaselessly on the great columbarium of concepts, the tomb of intuition, always building new and higher floors, shoring up, My dog is barking. I think someone just came home, so, but I'll keep reading. Let me just wait for that to calm down. Sorry about that. One of my favorite quotes by the philosopher Giulia is, "The cry of the dog is the stupidest cry in the animal kingdom." Yeah, the dog has something to say about Nietzsche. Where was I? As the bee builds the cells and at the same time fills the cells with honey, so science works ceaselessly on its great columbarium of concepts, the tomb of intuition, always building new and higher floors, shoring up, purifying, renovating the old cells, and is concerned above all to fill up that monstrous heaped up substructure and to set the entire empirical world, that is the anthropomorphic world, in order. I think it's very interesting that he says the entire empirical world is anthropomorphic, that we're sort of projecting in a way. If even active humans find their lives to reason in its concepts in order not to be washed away and not to disappear, then the inquirers build their hut close to the tower building of science in order to be able to assist in it and to find themselves a refuge under the extant completed part. So in a way, the truth is sort of a shield from the imposition of reality, in which like every moment, you can't step in the same river twice, every moment is completely new, and we build truth as a kind of way to tame reality. Build their hut close to the tower building of science in order to be able to assist in it and to find themselves a refuge under the extant completed part. And they need a refuge since there are frightening powers which are continually thronging in upon them, and the scientific truth contrasts with a truth of an entirely different kind, which bears the most dissimilar trademark. That urge to metaphor formation, that fundamental urge of humanity, which one cannot count out for a moment, since one would then be counting out humanity itself, is in truth not overcome and is hardly even tamed, thanks to the fact that a regular and rigid new world is built out of its desiccated products for the concepts as a fortress for humanity. It seeks a new region for its activities and another channel, and it finds it in myth and actually in art. It continually tangles the categories and cells of concepts because it puts forth new figurations, metaphors, and metonyms. It continually shows the lust to fashion the extant world of the awake person to be irregularly variegated, disjointedly incoherent, fascinating and always new, as is the world of dreams. Waking people are, in themselves, only fully aware that they are awake through the rigid and regular network of concepts. And for that reason, they sometimes even come to the belief that they are dreaming if that network of concepts is torn apart by art. Pascal was right to claim that if the same dream came to us every night, we would be as much absorbed with it as with things which we see every day. If a mechanic were sure to dream every night 12 complete hours straight through that he were king, then I believe, says Pascal, that he would be just as fortunate as a king who dreamed every night for 12 hours that he was a mechanic. The waking day of a mythically aroused people, such as the ancient Greeks, is through the continuous effect of marvel as it appropriates the myth, is, as a matter of fact, more like a dream than it is like the day of a scientifically down-to-earth thinker. I think that's true. I think that people who lived in ancient Greece were constantly worrying, is Athena gonna curse me? Is Zeus gonna fight with a different god in front of me and ruin my day? As a matter of fact, more like a dream than it is like the day of a scientifically down-to-earth thinker. If any tree could speak as a nymph someday, or a god in a bull's skin could drag a young woman away, if the goddess Athena herself is suddenly seen as she drives through the markets of Athens with a beautiful team of horses in Pisistratus' company, and an honest Athenian believes it, then anything is possible in any moment, as in a dream, and all nature swarms around people as if it were only a masquerade of the gods, who only made a joke of deceiving humanity in all shapes. Humans themselves, however, have an unconquerable tendency to let themselves be deceived, and are like people enchanted by good fortune if the rhapsode narrates an epic tale to them as true, or if a player in a play acts the king's role still more regally than reality shows the king to be. The intellect, the master of dissimulation, is free and is released from its former slave labor, so long as it can deceive without harm. Then it celebrates its Saturnalia. It is never more wanton, richer, more arrogant, cleverer, and more audacious. With creative delight, it jumbles up metaphors and shifts the boundary markers of abstraction, so that, for example, it designates the stream as the moving path which carries people places they otherwise walk. Now it has thrown off the sign of its servitude, formerly concerned to show with gloomier officiousness the path of the tool and the tool to some poor individual who lusts after being, and like a servant of a master who is setting out for plunder and loot, now it has become the Lord and may wipe off the expression of indigence from its face. Whatever it does now in comparison with its former conduct, everything conveys dissimulation in itself as the earlier bore distortion in itself. It copies human life, but takes this as a good thing, and appears to be quite content with it. That monstrous beam and board structure of concepts which needy people clamp onto to save their lives is only a scaffolding and a toy for the liberated intellect, for its most audacious stunts. And if the liberated intellect destroys it, jumbles it up, and ironically puts it together again, uniting the most disparate and separating neighbors, then it reveals that it doesn't need that stopgap of the needy, and that it is now is led not by concepts, but rather by intuitions. No regular path leads from these intuitions into the land of spectral schemata, of abstractions. Words are not made for them. People are speechless when they see them, or they speak in pure forbidden metaphors and in unheard of conceptual couplings, in order at least to correspond creatively to the impression of the powerful contemporary intuition through the demolition and derision of the old conceptual barriers. Thanks, Nathaniel. I hope you have a good night. There are epochs in which the rational person and the intuitive stood side by side, the one anxious about intuition, the other with disdain for abstraction, the latter as irrational and the former was uncreative. Both long to dominate life, this first since it knows how to counter the principal necessities through precaution, cleverness, and regularity, the second since as an overjoyous hero it does not see those needs and only takes as real the life which is refigured as appearance and beauty. Where once the intuitive people wielded their weapons more powerfully and triumphantly than their opponents, somewhat as in more ancient Greece, in the most favorable case, a culture can form and establish the dominance of art over life. That dissimulation, that denial of indigence, the brilliance of the metaphorical perceptions, and generally that an immediacy of deception accompanies all manifestations of such a life. Neither the house, nor the pace, nor the clothing, nor the clay jar reveal that severe need concocted them. It seems as if they all were intended to express a sublime felicity and an Olympian serenity, and as it were, a game with serious things. While the people who are guided by concepts and abstractions only repulse misfortune with these, without forcing good fortune for themselves out of the abstractions, while they aspire after the most freedom from pain. The intuitive people, standing in the middle of a culture, already reap a continually inflowing illumination, amusement, redemption, over and above the repulsion of evils. Of course they suffer violently when they suffer. Indeed, they suffer even more often, since they don't understand how to learn from experience and always fall into the same pits into which they have fallen before. They are then just as irrational in suffering as in felicity. They shout out loud and are inconsolable. How different things are with the Stoics under similar mischances, having learned from experience, people dominating themselves with concepts. Those who normally seek only sincerity, truth, freedom from deceptions, and protection from beguiling assault, now in misfortune bring forth the masterpiece of dissimulation, as the former does in good fortune. They wear no twitching, mobile human face, but rather, as it were, a mask with dignified symmetry of features. They don't shout and don't once vary their voices. When a proper thundercloud empties itself over them, then they wrap themselves in their cloaks and walk from under it with unhurried stride. And that's the end of the essay. I have no idea if anyone is still here. But we've got this distinction drawn at the end between the intuitive and the conceptual people. And there's a sort of virtuous ignorance in the intuitive people, it seems like. So I guess, why we read this in the aesthetic seminar is because what you could argue is maybe the thesis of the work is that between subject and object, there is no absolute or logical or necessary relation. There is an aesthetic relation at most. So it's always, what Kant would call, in beholding the work of art, a free play of the imagination. It's always a creative, sort of indeterminate relation when we try to put words to reality, when we try to describe existence. Yeah. So I guess that's all I have to say for the time being. But I hope that whoever has viewed this and is viewing this and will view it enjoyed this reading and discussion. As long as nobody is here who has any questions, I will just conclude the stream now. But if you liked this reading and discussion and would like me to do more of this, please let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to my channel because I do also regularly publish videos of readings of Nietzsche and other philosophers. So yeah, I might just go on night flirt now. I don't know, or I might go to bed, but thank you so much everybody for watching this and for everybody who participated in the conversation. I really appreciate you. Thanks so much.